There we go. You lose it a little bit at the very end of your lunge on the reverse lunge.
How dare you be so honest?
Very good. Yep. I'll never bullshit you.
Yo, what is up? We are back with
Oh
another episode of Krammer Talks Physio with Minju.
Yep.
Yeah,
the man of the hour.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we have been enjoying a lot of discussions surrounding like jiu-jitsu related stuff, right? And so I think today, let's take it a different direction, right?
Totally.
So because as much as we know, a lot of people training jiu-jitsu and MMA, but we also know a lot of people who does what?
Exactly.
Just working out in general, right?
And there's a lot of crossover between the populations too.
Exactly, yeah. So I think that the best jiu-jitsu players, they lift weights and do some type of strength and conditioning anyways, right? So I think they go hand in hand. So so why not let's discuss common injuries that kind of happens during workouts and, you know, some type of some awesome ways to, you know, perhaps lessen the risk and what to look out for and stuff like that, because that's your expertise, right? Yeah,
totally. Cool. A really good place to start is just with proper stability training or building an effective brace from the center of the body outwards. Lots of people, when they start weight training, get into the habit of compressing tissues, leaning into passive structures rather than active structures to find their stability. And then that can lead down the road to like feeling compressed all the time, aches and pains throughout the spine. Nothing quite at injury level, but it's the nagging stuff that goes, squatting just doesn't feel great today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I love it, man. You start talking all those different terminologies. Like, you sound so intelligent, but for me, it's just like out one ear, out the other. Compression, you know what? Yeah. What exactly do you mean by?
For compression, think of how the spine is built. It's a bunch of vertebrae stacked on top of one another, and along the backside of them, they have facet joints that all interlock kind of in a crossways like this. So you can imagine that if you jam those guys together, it'll feel stable because they don't have anywhere else to go. But over time, there's too much pressure on those joints, and the bones don't wear down or anything like that, but they do eventually get aggravated because they're constantly compressed, and it's not a particularly strong position if something goes wrong. So like if you want to be adaptable under load or something's happening or you're rolling with somebody and the body is used to finding passive stability by compressing itself together, it's not going to be as able to adapt to some more dynamic environment.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, yeah, it's starting to make a bit more sense now. So as always, I think we're going to talk about the science and the research and whatnot behind it, and then we'll do some practical demonstrations. So this way we can visually see what's actually going on as well, right?
For sure.
Yeah. So does that have something to do with like you know how some trainers will be like, use your core, man, engage your core.
Yep.
You know, does it have something to do with that?
They're coaching with the right intent, but in the wrong environment. Oftentimes, people have this idea of like, okay, engaging the core means pulling in my abs. I'm going to squeeze really hard, flex my six-pack muscle, that kind of thing, and they end up doing more of a vacuum a lot of the time. Like they pull the gut in rather than pushing out into it. The abdominals actually work much better when they're contracting eccentrically, which means they're working against an internal load. So in order to create that, we take a deep breath. You want to have the diaphragm drop down, compress the organs. They begin to push outward on the abdominal wall, and that's when you begin to contract your core and actually use that to compress and stabilize the spine.
Okay, so it's actually so you're saying it's not the actual sucking in.
Exactly.
Because sucking in, that's how we naturally think about flexing the core or engaging the core, but you're saying the opposite. You're almost pushing it out and force the internal pressure to actually activate those muscles. So it's kind of like a powerlifter's gut, that type of visual, right?
And the trick is really not to push the gut out itself. You want to have it naturally like have pressure downward from our breathing. So the lungs sit through here, and then as you properly fill the lungs, the diaphragm drops and compresses the organs. So it's less of like exaggerating the belly and then trying to contract, because that's just a relaxation of the abs and then trying to find them again. What you want to have is a neutral posture where your pelvis and thorax, your rib cage essentially are aligned with one another, so that when you breathe, the diaphragm drops down, the lungs fill with air, and then the abs contract on the pressurized organs.
Gotcha. You know what that reminds me of though? like the ancient martial art practice, where that's exactly how they would describe it.
Perfect.
Right? That's like in ancient Tai Chi and stuff like that, right?
Yep.
It's always like, dropping your diaphragm, so this way you are the strongest you can be.
Exactly.
So kind of like rooting yourself onto the earth, right?
There's nothing new under the sun. We just lose information or we lose context.
Or we find fancier ways to say it.
Yep. So like the fanciest way is intra-abdominal pressure, which it basically just means you've got pressure from the inside out of the body rather than tightening in on yourself.
Gotcha. Yeah. So again, before we move on to like actual demonstration and stuff, right? So what are some of the dangers in working out when you are not aware of how to properly brace your core, so to speak?
If your body is not effectively prepared for something and you feel braced and stable in only one particular condition, it may be that one day you're a little bit more fatigued and then you lose your brace in the middle of a set, and that could lead to injury if you're moving loads that you're not quite prepared to handle. So it's hard to say exactly what might happen to somebody. Like with a bracing failure, so to speak, you could get anything from like a little bit of a strain in your quad or your hamstring, depending on the lift. Or if you're bench pressing, you might find an unstable shoulder gets a little aggravated, so you end up with kind of an impingement feeling in the rotator cuff. But it could lead to stuff as nasty as like full-on joint injuries or whatever if you happen to completely fail. Or dynamic back stuff can occasionally lead itself into like a disc prolapse, but I don't want to get too far into like the kinesiophobia side of things. We're not here to make people afraid to move, just make them aware of like you want to move effectively and powerfully with as many options as possible,
right?
So that your body has a place to go to save you in case something starts going wrong.
Okay,
Yep.
cool. Yeah, so what would be the first steps to kind of train in that awareness then?
Basically, the easiest way is to start with the breathing, just like you would incorporate into your warm-up. We can demo this later on. I'll have you lie on your back, and I'll guide you through how you begin to find that deep spinal stabilization, or intra-abdominal pressure, essentially, and then how you apply that from a supine position, lying on your back, and then take that into standing, and then from there onto a loaded barbell. So once you've found it in the easiest scenario, you can train it, and then take it to more difficult scenarios.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So.
Yep.
Why not? Let's get to it then.
Sounds good.
Yeah, sounds like it's gonna be a lot of fun. Let's do it.
Boom. All right, so we're going to take Minju through finding deep spinal stabilization. It looks deceptively simple, but when you nail it, it'll feel quite impressive. You'll feel a lot more powerful, and it can be a little tricky to initially find if you've never practiced it. So Minju, I'll have you start by bringing your knees up to a sit-up position. Heels flat on the ground. Excellent. Now place your hands on the side of your abs, kind of like a Peter Pan or Superman pose. And now I want you to cough. And you feel that pressure out into your hands, that slight pop of the abdominals?
Yeah.
Excellent. So next time, find that pressure or that pop outward and maintain it, and then try and breathe behind that.
Behind that, okay.
Yep. So you'll feel the pressure into your fingers. It'll be sustained.
Yep.
And then as you breathe, what you'll begin to feel is that the back of your ribs begin to drop into the ground a little bit more. And from there, you'll begin to feel a pressure downward, compressing the organs into the hips. And then your abs contain all that pressure. There we go.
Okay, yeah.
And the trick is to maintain it on the exhale. So don't allow the abs to fall back into you. As you exhale, you want to maintain kind of the 360 degrees of expansion that we've created. And if you want to start making it more challenging for yourself, we're going to line your hips and pelvis up with your ribs. So from here, think of dropping the ribs a little bit more down toward the pelvis. And notice how the first thing that happened was your abs pulled up real hard to bring your tailbone toward you.
Right.
I want you to let go of that. So we're aiming to separate those two movements.
Okay.
So deep breath in. Exhale, ribs are going to come together and down. Excellent. Now from here, gently reach your tailbone up toward the ceiling. There we go. It doesn't look that much difference on camera, but he's in a much more effective position at this point to allow the diaphragm to drop. He's got pelvic floor and diaphragm opposition, basically meaning that they are parallel to one another and they can effectively contain the force that he's creating by breathing in deeply.
May the force be with you.
Exactly. This is the way. The way of BJJ.
Yes. Oh boy.
So,
oh man, that is deceptively difficult.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The trick is to find it in this position because you don't have to worry about standing balance or any other issues going on.
Right. So I guess if you can't even do it in a position like this, then you're definitely not going to be able to do it under load, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sometimes it gets easier for people to find something close to it under load because they have something external to work against. It's the same concept as using a weight belt. If you're using it properly, they're actually a little loose until you breathe out into them, and then they help reinforce your brace at that point.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Well, let's move on to step 2 then.
Yep. So we've just taken Minju through finding his deep spinal stabilization on the ground on his back.
So deep.
Yep. And now we're going to work to find it in standing. So you can start with the same cueing. You want to transfer your learning from one environment to the next. Place the hands on the hips. Cough. Excellent. Now once you've found that, keep that there. It's a little bit easier to breathe into the back ribs and feel the diaphragm drop in this position. So go for a deep inhalation. There we go. Think a bit of a less shoulder elevation and more dropping the air as deep into the body as you can. There we go. It's at this point that depending on your postural habits, you might find people either like to extend their knees too much, which tilts the pelvis forward, or they sit with a little bit too much of an anterior tilt, or posterior tilt, I should say, which is when the tailbone drops a little too far toward the ground.
So
Exactly.
you don't want to
Wiggly hips, no good.
Exaggerate.
We want neutral right underneath the body.
Yeah.
You can imagine stacking everything over the bucket that is your pelvis.
Always about that damn bucket.
Exactly. And then once you've found that, you want to test it with different movements to see if you can maintain the alignment of the bottom of your ribs and your hips. You can think of it as a square that you're not going to allow to change. And an easy way to test this is beginning to go into a lunge. You can go forward or backward, and then go through it.
All right, sure. So try to maintain the same thing. Go into a lunge.
Exactly.
Back,
And
let's
it'll
do
begin to feel much more like you're moving around your hips as the center point of your body,
Right.
rather than moving your hips through space. There we go. You lose it a little bit at the very end of your lunge on the
dare
reverse
you.
lunge.
How
but
dare you be so
overall,
honest.
Very good. Yep. Well, I'll never bullshit you. So.
All right. All right. Well, that's something to work on.
Exactly. And
sure.
then once you're confident finding it in a standing position, the next step is to start loading it. Oftentimes load will help people find it a little bit more once they're familiar with engaging it, because it's given the body something else to work against. And an easy way to start is rather than just diving under barbell right away, grab a kettlebell, put it in the rack position, and then work from there.
Yeah. So even a dumbbell will work, right?
Yep.
Right. So yeah, even something like this could work, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And then you would pretty much like do the same thing. Then find the.
Exactly
raise it
that.
and yeah, you know what? It actually helps to
Yep.
to engage the core.
Exactly. It should be a reflexive
Naturally,
thing. It should kick in when you need it, so
Right.
that you don't have to constantly be braced.
Yeah.
It's the people that we see that are always in brace mode that end up hurt more often than not, because their body doesn't have anywhere to go other than sixth gear.
Wow.
Yep.
Cool. Well, that is really interesting. I'm definitely gonna be working on that.
Yep.
All right. Cool, man.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you so much. Well,
You're
then
very
let's,
welcome.
Yeah, let's sit down and finish the conversation and
Sounds
see
good.
where we go from there. Yeah.
Perfect.
Cool. Whew.
There we go.
Yeah. You know what? Trying to really brace my core the correct way. Putting a lot of effort into doing it.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot more tiring than I thought.
Totally.
I'm actually.
Engaging muscles in a way that we don't typically train them, particularly in our day-to-day. There's no point in maintaining that level of bracing. We're free to breathe relaxed, and this introduces grading the intensity of our brace according to the task that we're doing.
Right. So should this be something that people should work on every day?
Yes, definitely. It can be practiced really easily at the start or end of your day if you have a meditation or breathwork practice. It can be thrown in your warm-up as you get used to it, and you'll start to feel yourself find it more often
Gotcha.
in
So
whatever you've warmed up for.
All right, so the best way is actually to just use this as part of your breath work in your warm up and cool down.
It's very complementary because an effective breath is going to lead to more effective bracing.
Gotcha.
They're not the same thing, but they do exist on a continuum. So the more you're bracing, the less you're going to breathe. Essentially, you're going to hold your breath longer. The more you're breathing, the less you're bracing, and it's more about knowing that you're safe and stable, strong in any mixture of those two, like 50-50, 30-70, etc.
Nice. Yeah. So if you don't know what we're talking about, the warm up and the cool down, that's one of our conversations that's got the most views so far.
Sweet.
Because it's relevant.
It's a good one.
Yeah, it's relevant to anything really.
Yep.
Right. So if you haven't seen that yet, highly recommend seeing it. I'll have the link somewhere right over here. Definitely check it out.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool.
Right on.
Yeah. So, and then basically in conclusion, then.
Yep.
Right. So let's wrap it up. We gave a lot of information. We want people to be able to really start practicing and incorporating that into their active lifestyles, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So once they start doing that, right, and then what type of improvements or how do they gauge to know if they are actually getting it and getting better at it?
You'll start to feel stronger and less compressed after your workouts. So sometimes when people spend a lot of time squatting or deadlifting under heavy loads, bench pressing, all the typical weight training stuff, we spend a lot more time compressing ourselves together under the weight. And with this, the more effective you are at it, you'll still experience some feeling of compression because it's inevitable with a load on the shoulders. But you'll begin to feel like there's less stress on the passive tissues of the back, so like your ligaments, your joints, etc. And you'll begin to feel a lot more of like, okay, I'm expanding from the inside out. My body is working as a single unit to move this weight rather than relying on wherever it feels strongest going off the bat.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. So in the opposite of that would be if you don't feel like you're actually starting to make those type of improvements, then that probably means you're doing something incorrectly, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Go back and film yourself lifting and see if you lose your positioning at any point, because that would be something you could take a look at and begin to improve from there. Minor changes are totally acceptable. The body adapts to movement fairly dynamically. But if you notice that you suddenly shift or lose one side of your brace while the other side stays strong, or you're partway through and you totally lose the opposition of your pelvis, like the whole butt wink and squatting thing, or cat backing your deadlifts. A rounded spinal position is not necessarily a bad thing in either of those lifts, but it's when we see it suddenly change that we have issues.
All right, excellent. Yeah, so if you got any other questions, or if you would like to see Chris for something that's personal just to you, then obviously we're gonna have his number right on the bottom. You can text him directly. You can email him directly with any questions, set up any kind of appointment that you want. We'll also have a direct link for you to book a session with Chris if you are in our neighborhood. Then that's going to be in the description of the video. And yeah, so that's it. That's it for today. Another awesome one. Thank you so much, Chris. This is probably one of the best Krammer Talks Physio so far in terms of information and in terms of just having lots of fun.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yes, and we'll see you guys next time.